Okay, yeah, might work. This might work. Preparing to live stream the meeting. Okay. All right. I think we are live here. There's a little bit of latency. Our apologies for the technical difficulties here.
Well, some impressive scrambling, Mel.
They do not make it easy to connect YouTube and Zoom. It seems like it would be, but it's not. Okay. So for anyone that is on right now, thank you so much for your patience. And we will be posting this video on our page once it is done. Alrighty. So I am going to go ahead and get started since we're a little bit behind. So hello, everybody who has joined us. I am Melissa Stangl. I am one of the founding partners of Soltara Healing Center, also the COO, so kind of behind the scenes operations. And I am currently here in Costa Rica at Soltara. And I am joined today by Chiddy, who is our Soltara integration specialist and just an all-around amazing person. He is a psychotherapist with many years experience supporting people before, during, and after their ayahuasca experience. So thank you so much, Sean, for joining us all the way from Peru, I believe.
That's right. Yeah, thank you very much, Mel. Yeah, I'm talking to you guys from Sacred Valley here in Peru, and where I'm living now. And yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks very much, Mel.
Awesome. Yeah. So here at Soltara, we offer in-depth integration support alongside ayahuasca plant medicine ceremonies. We are guided by Shapibo healers from the Peruvian Amazon. So all of our roots are in Peru. And our goal is to really help people to bridge the gap between the ceremony experience and going back into their lives back home, and really helping to integrate the experiences and the healing that they receive from the plant medicine into their lives. This is the second video in our series. We had another one that was towards the beginning of the quarantine, just really to support people with their mental health during a crisis and a global pandemic. This is still going on. We're 3 months later now, and it's been quite a year so far. So I do encourage anyone who hasn't seen that first video, go ahead and check it out, because there's definitely some great information on there. Currently at Soltara, we are closed for operations. Our plan at this time is to reopen November 1st. So we're looking forward to welcoming people as borders slowly open and this pandemic continues to hopefully subside and trend in that direction. So if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the YouTube chat, and we'll try and get to them at the end of this. But really just want to start with, Sean, I know you introduced yourself in the previous video, but for those who haven't seen it, maybe you can just give us a little bit of an introduction.
Sure. Yeah, so I started my work in this field working in Australia, where I qualified as a psychologist, and so I was supporting people with depression, anxiety conditions, PTSD trauma, and the like. I also did a bit of work in chronic pain management, so supporting people with all those kinds of issues. And then I was moved over to the UK for a while, and I was working for the National Health Service there in basically supporting people with similar kinds of conditions to those. And then at the end of 2015, I had an opportunity to come to an ayahuasca center in Peru, in the Peruvian Amazon, and that's where I started doing this integration work. So basically on site, I would be helping people during the retreats, and we would do sort of concurrent workshops, offering strategies like mindfulness, like really kind of grounding sort of processes, also from things like even from cognitive behavior therapy and various psychotherapeutic support at the retreats. And that got really fantastic feedback, because one person sort of described it as like a mental health boot camp alongside their ceremonies, and someone else said it was like basically the first time they drank ayahuasca, it was like being washed down the Peruvian Amazon. And then when we were doing these kind of workshops alongside it, it felt like they were still being washed down the Peruvian Amazon, but now they were in a canoe and had a paddle. So there's something about applying these kind of strategies in that context that helps people feel confident about what they're doing. And so that's what I bring to the integration process as well. Obviously, we're helping people prepare even before they go, and afterwards when they get home. And so that's my role with Soltara.
Well, we're very, very lucky to have you. And I think that's a really great analogy, very appropriate because, coming from the Western world, with most of our guests, as most of our guests actually do, into this sort of very traditional space and traditional way of working with healing and looking at the world. There is an entire cosmology and culture around the Shapibo way of working with the medicine. And it can be very powerful and also very different than what most people are used to. And so I think that having a bit of a foot in both worlds can be helpful for people, just to know that there are tools that are applied in kind of their culture and worldview that might be supportive of this type of work, where the Shapibo culture, integration is inherent in their way of life because
Exactly.
ayahuasca is inherent in their way of life. And so integration is just a part of their entire culture. And it's not necessarily this separate thing, but I think it is important to talk about for people who might not be from, that world or have that sort of experience, to be able to be equipped with extra tools to navigate an entirely different world and culture. So I think that's wonderful that you bring these things to the table, and certainly having a paddle and a canoe can be very helpful when there's rough waters.
Exactly.
So you and I have been talking a little bit about what we want to discuss, and integration being a very big term. It's also a very personal term. It's going to look different for everybody, and so one of the things that I think is really important is to kind of discuss the navigation of the nuances of integration. You've been working with people for several years now and have seen a wide variety, I'm sure, of different journeys and processes, but we had been talking about some common threads that might be prevalent. So the first one that I thought was very interesting, there's this idea that has been perpetuated, which we try not to perpetuate, but that ayahuasca is sort of this panacea, or it's something that 10 years of therapy in 1 week, and then you kind of go home and yeah, and that can be very true, but I think it's also important to frame that this is a longer term process, and I think people may have different expectations of what they can receive when they hear, oh, 10 years of therapy in 1 week, great. And then I'm done and I've completed 10 years of therapy, and then I go home and I'm this new person. So can you talk a little bit about, framing this retreat and this experience within the larger context of life and healing?
Yeah. I think it's really important to be, grounded and down to earth in our approach to ayahuasca and plant medicines in general, and not to have unreasonable expectations, because those kind of 10 years of therapy in one night scenarios do seem to arise for some people, and they're the ones who go out there and go, wow, it's the best thing that ever happened to me. And for many people, they're going to get a benefit. It might not be quite that dramatic. And so we want to really set people up to have reasonable expectations, and to understand that we like to frame it as it's a piece of work. Exactly how much goes on in that is a bit like how long is a piece of string. For some people, they're going to get amazing shifts and transformations, and we love to see that. It's fantastic. But for other people, it's more like something's going to happen, something's going to shift, something's going to open up, and then in very rare instances there are going to be people who the changes are far more subtle. For some people, they don't notice them until further downstream. Later on, looking back, they realize things have been shifting and changing, and so it's important to understand that whatever happens, to just come with an open mind, and to be open and curious and ready to do ongoing work even after they get home. That's a way to get the most out of it, and to not be sort of pacifying yourself by imagining that you're going to take this medicine, it's going to do everything for you. Your life's going to be transformed, and life after ayahuasca will never be the same again. Because for most people, in many ways, it will be the same again, but something is shifting in there with the medicine and the process of the retreat and doing this work.
Yeah, I think that's really a really good way to say that, and sort of framing the retreat experience as more of an opening, I think is kind of what we were talking about, where, I think it's really beautiful the way that the healers work. It's mostly in the energetic sense. And so, when we talk about the things that people go through and the kind of role of the healers in the space, it's generally more on the energetic level. And that is a subtle body. I mean, that's not necessarily immediately apparent in changed mental patterns or euphoric emotions, which might accompany it, but might not be like these long lasting effects that are kind of this permanent change. And one thing that I think is really beautiful is the way that the Icaros, the healing songs that the healers sing, penetrate the subtle energetic body. And for some people that can look like a very physical experience, and maybe they don't necessarily have the mental shifts right away, but the reason could be that first they needed to get those more foundational aspects of the work cleaned and cleared and dealt with, and that's where the healers can come in and do that. But maybe it's not the flashbang sort of change that you might see if you look up testimonials on the internet and things like that.
Yeah, it's never a good idea to compare yourself to other people in any aspect of life too much.
Right.
And certainly this is one of those things where a lot of people will be like, why is that person next to me having this mind-blowing thing and I just feel kind of nauseous and this heavy
Right.
stuff moving through me? They might not realize that moving of that heavy energy might actually be doing more for them over the long term than having some whiz bang, journey across the universe or journey beyond the
Right.
self or whatever you want to say could have. Actually, I've been talking about this to other friends recently as well, and think about the allegory of the hare and the tortoise. In this kind of work, you want to be the tortoise. You want to be going slow and
Mm.
stable. That's actually what's going to see you get the best out of this in the long run. As much as it's awesome to have the wonderful visions and transpersonal experiences and things like that, they're amazing, they're fantastic. Of course, I'm not trying to diminish them so much as to emphasize, like you're saying, that the more ordinary energetic changes that don't seem so obvious transformative on the surface actually can be in the long run. So to be
Yeah.
patient and yeah.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really sort of, it's not familiar to the Western paradigm to have I think a lot of times in Western culture we're looking for these very cathartic experiences and these kind of very big shifts, almost in a sense, so that at least for me, it's like I and the beginning of my journey was seeking those very cathartic experiences because I felt like that was how I could give myself permission to make the changes.
Yeah.
Because if I had this, really big purge or really, intense ceremony that, okay, after that, I'm allowed to make the shifts that I wanted to make. And
Okay. Yeah, it makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah. And
Yeah.
it's like, I almost needed that thing to cling to. And, I think that that's something that I've gotten caught up with in the past. And, over time, it was the message that came through for me was, you need more rest. You don't need more cathartic experiences. Your nervous system is frayed. Like, you need to come back into your body and come back into the listening of things, and that these subtle shifts are can be more impactful, like you're saying, over the longer term.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really important what you were just saying about settling the nervous system and learning how to self-regulate and relax. And then, it's like what you're saying is coming from this frame, there's something wrong with me, I want to fix it. And then there's this sort of grasping toward liberate us from, the the idea that we think there's something wrong with us, which is why I really like the mindful framework, and why when I'm working with people I often bring this to the fore, is because what we're really saying actually is from the perspective of awareness, which is, they say what you are looking for is where you are looking from. So our
Mm.
perceptual system and our awareness, when you get in touch with it, and ayahuasca often gives people glimpses of this and helps them see it, there's nothing actually wrong with it. There are things in our system, so there might be trauma stored in our body and in our emotions and in our thoughts, which we're going to be hopefully healing and working through in various ways. But we as a person are fine and always were fine. What we really are is always. And when our system actually starts to relax and settle, we're naturally returning to the recognition of that. We're not turning into a different person. We're just, relaxing more into ourself. Um, so
Wow.
yeah, that's why it's really useful to come with the right frame as well.
That's beautiful. And I think that's
Mm.
so powerful, because I know in my personal experience that was the case, where I was like, these things are wrong about me, and I need to fix them, and I want to purge them out, right? I want to get rid of them. And this kind of approach is more integrative, right? It's about accepting those parts. And a big shift that happened for me in that regard, is kind of relating to the nervous system as well, is the tendencies or the patterns, or my bodily sensations that were the parts that I felt like I wanted to fix. Learning to accept that those were the unconscious mechanisms of action that my body took to help me feel safe. They were trying to
Yeah,
protect me, right?
exactly.
And so it's like there wasn't this hatred of them, or this sort of like criticism, this self-critical loop that I get caught in. I know many people
Yeah,
who
me
come
too.
to this work, right, are, it's a
Pretty
very
much
common
everyone.
thing,
Yeah,
especially from Western society. It's like we are very judgmental of ourselves. And I think that perpetuated for a really long time, my nervous system not being able to sort of relax and become more regulated. And
yeah.
I was trying to force out these parts of me, and learning to come to a place of love, where, okay, those parts of me were born out of a desire for my body to protect itself, or
Yeah.
for a way to help me feel safe, even though they
They're all
weren't serving me.
adaptations. Yeah, everything in us is working ultimately for us, whether or not we can see it. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I find
Yeah.
with,
And
and the medicine seems to be capable of showing us these perceptions where we realize not just that it's working for us, but the very place where there is pain or numbness or whatever, or fear, whatever is going on, and we think we've got to get rid of that. Actually, what we often start to see is, no, we're not getting rid of it. We're going into that, and through the very subtle ways in which perception interacts with the body's physiology,
mm,
as we start to see, and through processes which are hard to describe in words, but get in contact with and relax those parts, which the medicine helps with, and which various strategies which we can use alongside the medicine and before and after can also help with, you start to realize that you wouldn't want to get rid of that, because that is gold. It's like that is like a pathway back to a more complete and authentic sense of self.
mm,
And then we start to realize, oh my goodness, it's not just these sort of love yourself kind of sayings are not just platitudes. They're actually really, really true. When you it it, it it's very hard to see sometimes when we're in a difficult state of, or a traumatized state, or a depressed state, or whatever it may be. But as we're able to bring some form of connection back to that place, we start to see, no, it really, really is on the other. It's like before something happened to us, we were feeling that sense of being more whole and complete, whether or not we can even remember that, was the changes happened so long ago.
mm,
And we're actually returning through the very place of the pain to regain that. We're not getting rid of anything. So
mm.
um, which in
It's
a
like
sense
a
is what
signal
integration
from the
is
body.
about too. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's a way, it seems like it's a way that your body is letting you know what it needs and where it needs tending to. And so, like you're
yeah,
saying, turning into that, is uncomfortable, very, very uncomfortable. And,
sure can be.
we're very much taught to turn away from pain. I mean, that's our kind of knee-jerk reaction. And so, I think plant medicines have a real opportunity and potential to help people approach that pain from a place of love and from a place of, okay, you're in a safe container, you're being cared for, this is why you're here, and giving yourself permission to really lean into that. And I think that that's something that is really translatable to life outside of the medicine space too. And I think that that's part of this integration work, is learning to do that on a consistent basis. I know for me, it's been an interesting journey where in the pursuit of achievement, or success or happiness or what have you, it's like we're taught to suppress those things and bottle them up and just not deal with them, escape from them through various cornucopia of mechanisms provided to us by by our society. And this is a very kind of counterintuitive way, but it is a way to become more whole and really accept those parts of yourself and listen to those parts of yourself, because that's like you're saying, the pearls of wisdom there, which can be hard, when you're not in the medicine space, when you are back in these environments of like the default world, where you have kind of the triggers and the patterns and potentially the people too. So I think that one thing that you and I were kind of talking about was this idea of us being our own masterpieces. And some days, that work is really deep, and some days you're gonna, really feel into that work in your integration. And then some days you can only do it for 5 minutes, and maybe some days not at all, and that's okay, that this is a longer term journey. And, it's not just about, why am I not fixed yet? Like, I thought I did the work. I thought I did the healing.
It comes back to that frame of like, if we frame ourselves as trying to fix ourselves, if we frame our mission as trying to fix ourselves, then it seems to become a never-ending process like that. Whereas if we frame ourselves as just like responding to what our body is needing and our emotional needs are at any point in time, then it's just a continuous flow from day to day. And certainly there can be a sense of, like if you're depressed or in a traumatized state or unhappy with various aspects of your life, then of course there's that sense of urgency to return to a state of well-being, and that's totally understandable. But even within that, it can be helpful to understand that what you're doing is, you're settling down aspects of the system and returning things to a state of well-being. You're not fixing who you are. And so it's like you said, that if we frame a retreat as a kind of initiation or an opening or an entry into this type of process, then you can carry the sense of what the ceremonial space and the container of the retreat allowed you to do in terms of feeling safe enough to go into these painful places and look at things honestly, and then start to develop structure in your life so that you can do that on a more regular basis. Then things can start to really stabilize faster than people realize. Although for some people it is a really bumpy road, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that's really great. And kind of going into a little bit that ability to stabilize and create that sort of structure within your life outside of the ceremony. What are some examples of what that could look like for people in kind of like the day-to-day life going back home?
Yeah, so we can give examples, but obviously these are not instructions that everyone has to follow. People can follow whatever path suits them. But things that people commonly find really helpful is, we're talking about the importance of the body and emotions, some kind of physical practice, be it as simple as walking, be it yoga. For me, it's jujitsu at the moment, which I'm finding fantastic because my work involves a lot of, sitting while I'm talking to people, and so to do something really physical is really beneficial. And so just anything that suits you. For some people, it's running. For some people, it's spending time walking in nature. For some people, it's dancing. For some people, it's swimming. It doesn't really matter what it is, but just something to get your attention back into your body, to be expressing and moving the body, really beneficial. And also, I guess the sort of another implication of that is it's not all about thinking about everything. And trying to figure it all out in our heads. That's a trap, which the Western kind of culture emphasizes so much that we just fall into it a lot. Obviously, things like meditation for many people are really, really beneficial. Some people just hate it, so never feel like you have to. And if you're not doing it, there's something wrong with you. But for many people, if they can have some form of meditation practice, that's very beneficial. Even just a few minutes a day is better than nothing. And obviously for some people that can be longer practices. There are many different meditative traditions and techniques you can apply. For me, I frame things as mindfulness, but they're basically body-centered, emotional-centered meditations. And a lot of people find, especially in the immediate period after their retreats, things like journaling helpful, where they're just in a relatively free form, however it comes out, writing down what they remember and whatever's on their mind, which is also a way of kind of getting things out of their head so they don't have to just keep turning them over in their thoughts all day. And it does tend to be, for many people, a process of, as they write things down and process them in that way, there's a sort of form that starts to take shape in their writing. They start to be able to recognize more about what's going on. For some people, artistic expression. So drawing, painting, making music, whatever it may be, doesn't matter. There's no limits to that either. Again, especially in the immediate period after the retreats, paying attention to the dream space is really, really useful. This is an important aspect of the Shapibo way of working with ayahuasca and the other plants that they work with concurrently. And a lot of information comes through our dreams. It's connected to directly to the plant worlds as well. It's connected to the creative worlds. It's connected to the subconscious, which is, as our subconscious is processing things, as things shift in there, that's actually changing the way that we, if you imagine that that's our kind of reference section that when things happen, we very quickly refer to the subconscious, not necessarily even recognizing it. And so as things are shifting and changing in there, that can actually change the way we're reacting to what's going on in the world without us necessarily even thinking we've done any work, just because something has shifted so in our subconscious model of things. And so by paying attention consciously to our dream space, then that can sort of help bring sort of conscious awareness to that process as well. We get intuitive feedback from it. We start to get hints about things that are going on in ways that are difficult to put into words, but can be really beneficial. Some people get a sense of guidance from it. So for some people, it's just journaling their dreams. For some people, I often point them towards literature, lucid dreaming, and sometimes out-of-body experiencing, because there are some really, useful books and information around about that from people who've spent a lot of time investigating it, that can provide a sense of familiarity to people who aren't familiar with it, and for whom the ayahuasca process kind of invokes a more lucid dreaming experience, or sometimes out-of-body experiences as well.
It's very similar, isn't it? The landscape of the ayahuasca experience, and even on more of like a scientific level, ayahuasca connecting different parts of the brain, which allow you a more conscious access to your subconscious inner landscape, and sort of following that experience. And even just in general too, I mean, I find that when I start to pay attention to my dreams, and like you said, journaling really helps. And framing my dreams as like, okay, this is what I am subconsciously processing, and creating kind of this world within, and that being a way that I can access the same sort of space that ayahuasca can open up as well, that subconscious landscape. And kind of more and more conscious access to it over time as you're really directing energy and attention to it, I'm sure can be very revealing for people.
Absolutely. Yeah, I heard someone talking about in Tibetan Buddhist tradition where they, have lucid dreaming practices, saying, why spend only your waking hours, striving for enlightenment when you can also spend your sleeping hours. Well, it's good
It's
logic.
probably easier when you're like
Smart people over there.
Yeah. You're like no longer bound to space time. So that's probably like a more exploratory way to gain or get farther along on that path.
Yeah, and also just to understand an important aspect of the way our mind is working. It
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
reveals itself in the sleeping hours. So if you can
Yeah.
bring consciousness to that, then you start to see more about how our mind's actually working, which is what a lot of their practices are about, is gaining wisdom through understanding what our mind is actually doing, and therefore being able to see through it and understand ourselves compassionately and other people compassionately.
I think that's a really interesting kind of flip side of the coin, kind of going back to what you were saying about sort of a mental fixation on the healing process. I know for me, I'm definitely guilty of trying to overanalyze, and sometimes that's helpful, and sometimes I think it does get in the way because there is this element of wanting to control the process, or feeling as if I have more of a sense of agency over my healing, but actually I'm just kind of in my own way sometimes. So can you kind of talk about like that a little bit of, what is a good way to navigate integration as it relates to tying together this like the mystical and the mundane, and kind of like our propensity to really want to analyze and overthink or just intellectualize our healing.
Yeah.
How does that play
Yeah,
in?
there's probably many ways and to answer that, and many opinions people could offer. So I'll just give a slice of a perspective really, and say, what I have noticed for myself, because I'm as guilty as many of that kind of overthinking historically, and what I've noticed, especially as through the meditative practices which I'm been working with for a very long time, is that your thoughts are always available, and they do a very good job of constructing themselves whenever you let them. So it's perfectly workable to actually focus into the emotions and to the body and to work at that level. And when things resolve at that level, which they can if we allow them to, as the body comes into a state of relaxation, a lot of things just start to resolve themselves. Then you will very quickly find that the mind's perspective shifts very easily without effort. So a lot of that analysis becomes completely pointless and redundant in light of that. And actually, to the degree to which we're engaged in the analysis, again, without ever wanting to sort of demonize thinking in any way, it's not about that. It's more just to realize that we don't need to put so much effort into it, certainly on the personal level. In terms of what a lot of people are trying to achieve when they're trying to say, well, I feel bad and I want to feel better. How do I think my way through that? Well, that tends to just go around in circles. And to be compassionate towards it, understand that response of trying to think our way through things is itself an adaptation we made at some point in our past to circumstances where perhaps we were being, our emotional experience was being diminished, or we weren't being supported emotionally, or, just there's so much emphasis in Western culture on thinking in general that it's hardly a surprise that we think thinking is the way to solve everything.
Right.
And so and ayahuasca often does give people a very, very direct introduction into the importance of feeling. And so that can be really helpful as well. Once you have some sort of solid initiation into it, it's much easier to return to the more somatic based practices as well. But then to actually sort of formally learn some form of somatic processing of things can be really beneficial as a part of this integration as well. If we're trying to say you don't have to work everything out in your head, a lot of things can be worked directly through the body and the emotions. well, people are going to be like, well, how the hell do I do that? Well, at some level, you have to learn how. So, there are somatic practices you can apply. There's, for me, it's come through these somatic focused healing meditations, which I just put broadly under the banner of mindfulness because it's a word that most people have some, connection to or can find out about easily enough. Or, yoga practices, qigong, tai chi, martial arts, dancing, breath work I didn't mention yet, obviously very, very helpful. All of these practices which involve, focusing attention into the body in some form of often structured or coordinated way to really ground things. And so, you mentioned this sort of navigating the mystical and the mundane. Most of the stuff we do on a day-to-day basis is fairly mundane. So, having too much of a preoccupation with the sort of mentalized focus on this amazing experience I had where I saw all these fantastical beings operating on me, or I saw this, it's like, well, okay, how do we ground that? How do we make that a part of our ordinary life? And oftentimes, one important question to ask in the integration process of this is, what can you actually specifically do about that experience? And in the case of many mystical experiences, the answer is not much.
Right.
In which case, how much attention do you want to put on it, really, if there's nothing you can actually do with it on a day-to-day basis? And one way to sort of understand that is, it's not dismissing the experience. The experience is affecting you in your subconscious mind. It's a memory, and we could say memory forms the foundation of belief. If you ask someone why they believe something, they will say, well, because this, and this happened to me. I was told this, and this, and that's why I believe this about myself and the world. So the memory of what has happened and the experiences we've had informs what we believe, and our beliefs essentially direct our actions in many ways. And so a mystical experience becomes a memory, which affects our beliefs, which affects our future behavior. So you don't necessarily, you're not going to lose it just because you're not fixated on it. And to me, it makes a lot of sense to really stay grounded with this work, because there is the potential for people to get kind of carried away with and preoccupied with the sort of more mystical elements of it. And sometimes that can be a distraction from doing the seemingly mundane things that actually make up most of our life.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's been an interesting experience, for my journey. And I know many other people kind of coming from a culture and a world where mystical experiences aren't necessarily common. Like, I had never had a mystical experience before I came to psychedelics, so it was definitely this, very eye-opening thing. Like, oh, okay, like for me, it felt like, okay, this actually does shake some core beliefs within me. And how do I take that into my life, and how does that affect what my belief system is going forward, or how I move through the world, or how I relate to other people and other things. And there, for me, it was a sense of a deeper meaning to life too. And so I think that's really interesting, like that you're saying it, not necessarily to fixate on the experience itself, but to draw from it, or to understand that it does affect things in different ways that aren't necessarily like directly correlated, but but that could help with more of that foundational work, like you were saying, whether that be deeper meaning, deeper connection to self, or more of a spiritual connection, things like that.
Exactly. It's going to motivate all sorts of potential changes in behavior and priorities in life without you necessarily having to go through intensive analysis of it. But of course, for some people, if they're getting confused about it, it is helpful to talk to someone about it, or to, to do some reflection on it. We're not in any way trying to diminish the value of that. It's really just to highlight the value of, being as grounded as you can be during that process.
Speaking of talking about it, so this is something that I definitely struggled with. I know a lot of people that come through Soltara and have worked with plant medicine, when they first come to it, it can be a struggle to find the words. This is such an ineffable experience, and can be very visceral and hard to ground into any sort of words. I like how you said, some people it does help to talk about it and reflect on it, and then I think in other cases too, you and I had kind of been discussing how it can almost pigeonhole the experience when you have to form it into words. So can you kind of talk about that balance of how can we talk about it? What are some ways that people can put it into words, and then what are some ways where maybe that doesn't serve to try and do that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's a concept that comes from a mindful tradition and saying, try and stay with the unknown. So whenever there's something ineffable that's not easy to sort of crystallize into concepts, as best as you can, allow it to stay in a state of not being classified with a sense of unknowing, because that seems to actually facilitate this more subtle transformation at a deep level, in a way that allows changes to take place before the mind kind of rushes in to reassert itself and kind of crystallize everything again, which in some ways can put limitations on things. And so basically, everyone has to, as best as they can, follow their own intuition as to when it's a good idea to talk about things and when not to. Certainly in the immediate periods after a ceremony or retreat, if people are feeling very sensitive, then we would invite them to really respect their own sensitivity. And if they are going to talk to people at all, try and talk to people who are also sensitive. But preferably people who they are reasonably confident are going to be understanding and supportive of what they've been through. Because I guess coming back to that point about the idea that experience can become the foundation of new beliefs, likewise, when you're accessing, a memory can become the foundation of a new belief. When you're accessing a memory, what happens while you're in connection with that memory can influence how that memory is stored again from that point. So whatever kind of interaction you have with someone when you're talking about something that you've been through will also potentially affect the way that memory is then restored. So if someone reacts very negatively or in a manner that is somehow disappointing to you because you were so excited about it, and maybe they were like, yeah, like you became one with all, I heard that one before, whatever, and they're sort of in some way dismissive of it, then the sense of disappointment or deflation that you experience within that interaction with them can actually become associated to the memory and take away a bit from the importance of it for you. So that's why sometimes we would recommend people err on the side of not talking too much about their experiences. Of course, many people find it next to impossible to do because they're so excited about their experience that they just want to tell everybody who will listen. And so it's just something to be aware of. It's not a disaster. Whatever happens is just, something to be aware of. And of course, we offer the follow-up integration circles. So if people want to talk to other people who've actually been through the experience too, then we're offering them on about a monthly basis. And so they're a really good, format for people to talk about things where they're pretty much guaranteed to get a supportive response. Obviously, talking to other people who have some understanding of ayahuasca one-to-one can be really useful. We offer everybody who's come through their first integration session with me as a part of their retreat package. So a lot of people find it really valuable to talk to me or another integration support person. And then, it's okay, obviously, with family members and whoever people want to share their experiences with, just bearing in mind the importance of everything I've just been talking about, that you can never guarantee how someone's going to respond. So sometimes, I know in the integration talks, when people are coming to the end of their retreats, we're recommending to people that they perhaps talk in more sort of general terms about the benefits they're experiencing rather than necessarily the blow by blow narrative of what they went through, because sometimes it's kind of a little bit startling to people who are not familiar with it. So there's just a few things to consider there.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we share with people at Soltara, practicing discernment and just also, being really aware of protecting your own emotional safety as it relates to the experience. Yeah. And so I think that is why it's really important to have these sort of safe spaces, whether that be group integration circles or one-on-one, discussions after your retreat with someone who, can really hold that container and allow maybe the experience to unfold further as part of the integration itself. I think that's really great. So I think that there's this interesting paradox that comes up. I think that it's something that I've talked about with people before, and I felt this myself, where there's this idea of parts of ourselves dying away, or potentially sometimes people experience something akin to ego dissolution, where it feels like they've died and are reborn in the experience. That idea juxtaposed with this idea of integration and integrating the full self and accepting and connecting to all parts. And so can you talk a little bit about that dichotomy and sort of that like seeming paradox, how to kind of wrestle with this idea of like, should parts of me be purged and cleaned away and let go of, or should I be integrating everything? Like what's the balance there, if there is one?
Yeah, that's almost like
right?
intimidating to try and answer without sounding full of shit. But I for that particular type, for that particular question, I really often refer people to something like Adyashanti's "The End of Your World," which is a book that he wrote specifically about awakening experiences. He's talking more from the Zen tradition, I guess, which is the tradition that he came up in. He's not talking about plant medicine at all specifically. However, I think it's a useful reference point to just understand that these are things that can happen. These awakening experiences where we experience a sense of transcendence from ourself. In terms of without wanting to get too complicated about it, I think some of the dying experiences that people have don't strictly fit into the awakening experience that he's trying to define. But it doesn't matter, because a lot of the same rationale will still be beneficial in approaching them. A basic principle is to understand is that what you really are cannot die. So whenever something is dying, it's in a sense a perception of who we thought we were that's actually dying. And so, just like many people when they were children may have believed, for example, in many cultures, in Santa Claus, in European cultures, and in Santa Claus. Then at a certain age, they no longer believe in Santa Claus. They're still the same person, but that belief system has shifted. It's the same thing. Some aspect of who we thought we were is falling away, and then we will more or less inevitably form a new identity after that. And then I guess you could say the integration there is just accepting the departure of something that's essentially now gone, which can bring up all sorts of emotions and processes along with it too, and just recognizing the stability and completeness of what it's replaced with. So sometimes it seems like a relatively minor thing, sometimes it's huge, and adjusting to go through those kind of things. So again, it's a huge topic, and I don't even feel qualified to do it justice. I'm just giving my 2 cents worth here. I don't want to position myself as some kind of expert on that at all.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's really really helpful and interesting, that maybe the dying of this perception of yourself, but that's not necessarily like losing who you are in essence.
Yeah. It
And
can seem like that at some
right.
level, and I don't want to diminish how challenging that can be for people in any way. But what people ultimately come to realize is they're fine, and
Yeah.
and actually better than fine, the sense of peace that can come from those things, and sort of
Mhm.
liberation from many of the deep fears we have, can be, yeah.
Something that comes to mind in that regard too is like for example, dealing with anger. You know, there's a part of healing or working with anger for me where it's like I need to let go of some of that anger and release some of that anger. And then there's also a part of me that's trying to find the pearls of wisdom that come from that emotion, and really trying to gain whatever is valuable from that, so that that emotion can still exist. You know, maybe the parts that I let go are the parts that weren't very centered, or that there was a part that just needed to be discharged because it just needed to be expressed. But like the underlying reason for my anger can reveal new insight into, you know, how I set my boundaries, for example, or, you
Yeah,
know,
exactly.
where that's been violated, or, you know, however that looks. So yeah, I think that's really, it's really interesting, like especially when we talk about kind of mystical experiences and these seeming paradox. I just think it's always an interesting kind of philosophical discussion to
Yeah, and
yeah.
medicine does a very good job at helping people be able to contend with seeming paradoxes much better than they otherwise might be able to. I've had those kind of
Yeah.
experiences many times, and it's like
Yeah.
when we experience them enough, something just starts to just let go of trying to figure it all out, because
Being
to
one with the
the
mystery.
yeah, the thinking mind gets really confused about all these things. But if you just don't think about them, they're fine. Like
Yeah,
there
yeah.
is no problem unless you make it a problem.
That's very interesting. And I think that is where so much of this processing through the body consciousness comes in,
Yeah,
and really like learning to listen to how I can um, resolve things without necessarily having the mental story, although that can sometimes also help frame it or support it, but leaning more into kind of like this processing through my
yeah.
body.
I, I think it was I think it was David Bertelli who offers the traumatic release exercises process, which is another physiological release process, essentially centered on shaking through the psoas muscle down here, which people can look up if they want to. I won't go into it in too much detail. I think he makes a comment in his book that it's like from a certain perspective, we can say that the mind, one way of looking at an aspect of what the mind does is it just rationalizes the experience of the body.
Hmm.
So if the body is relaxed and our emotions are centered and calm, and we're relatively stable, then the mind will just pick up on that and go, okay, good, everything's good, you know,
Two-way
and we'll
street.
roll with that,
Yeah.
and it won't be so worried about figuring. I'm talking about our personal life out so much at that level. It would just relax into it. It doesn't mean, obviously, you need to, if you want to build a house, you need to think and plan. If you want to do a project, that's when you need to engage your mind. But when it comes to like figuring out our sense of self and who we are and all these things, it's surprising how much for most of us you actually do a lot better thinking less rather than more.
Yeah, that's definitely
Yeah.
a good integration tip
Yeah.
for many people.
Sometimes easier
So
said than done, but
yeah, almost always for me.
then
um,
then what people do is they start thinking, oh, I'm thinking too much wrong, and so it's like it's the endless thought traps. But so I have complete compassion to everyone's experience of trying to implement that. There are definitely ways of
yeah.
doing it that make it easier, but yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I want to get to some of the questions, you know, that have been on this chat, and thank you guys for posting some of them. But real quick, I just do want to touch on, you know, kind of talking about emotional safety, discernment, navigating our experience and how we talk about it, but then kind of taking that a step further of um, relationships in our lives, and
Hmm.
how it can be really difficult for people who have had this type of experience. Maybe it's very profound or transformative in one way or another, and how, that can be difficult to then go back into the social circles, family and friends, people who, may be noticing these changes but not sure how to deal with them, or how relationships can change. Can you just talk a little bit about maybe what you've seen in integration, and how you've supported people with that?
Yeah, I think in general, the dominant thrust of people's experience in relationships is they just recognize how important the people in their life are, be they their intimate relationships or their family relationships, parents, children, extended family, friends, community, everyone really. People just realize, oh my God, these people in my life are so important. And so overall, that's the direction things seem to go in with people. I guess the challenges that people express are things like, I've had this profound life-changing experience and my priorities are shifting as a result, often towards a different attitude towards physical health, a different attitude towards mental and spiritual health, lifestyle changes related to that, and sometimes recognizing that if the people around them haven't had those kind of experiences, their priorities might be different, and sometimes they end up feeling like a sense of, I don't know, some form of discord around that. We obviously just encourage people to be really, really patient and understanding both of themselves and other people around them in those kind of contexts, and just wait, because oftentimes things do settle down. And I guess we could say conceptually, if a relationship is like a meeting between people in a certain kind of field of being, then if you change at a certain point, the other person will adapt to that quite naturally. That will often happen. So sometimes if people are just patient, just be compassionate and gentle with themselves and the other person, then things can kind of rearrange kind of under the surface in a good way. And I guess also, when we were talking earlier about how to communicate about your experience, to just understand and potentially anticipate that if you give people the blow by blow and the wow factor, some people will be understandably confused or intimidated by that if you're describing things that are completely outside their life experience and worldview, and that can seem disappointing. So if doing that, to just talk in more general terms and say, like, I'm feeling these shifts going on, I'm feeling like I really want to, like, I'm recognizing more the importance of these aspects of my health and life, and different priorities. Describe things in more down-to-earth, ordinary terms that other people can relate to, then you might get a different response from them, and that can really help to your loved ones, family members, and people around you to I guess adapt to whatever changes you're going through.
And help you to connect with them further, rather than having any more sort of discord arise as a result of the experience. And that'd
exactly.
Be a way
to, I don't want to oversell the discord thing either, because obviously people do bring it up as a challenge that they're experiencing in some circumstances, but just emphasize, most people are basically saying they just realize how much they appreciate and love the people around them and how important they are. So that's really where a lot of people are coming from. The funniest conversation I ever had with someone was two partners who'd both been through an ayahuasca retreat. One of them was feeling really, really happy afterwards, and essentially wanted to check in to make sure it was okay to be feeling so happy, because their partner had essentially been implying to them that because they were so happy, they must be missing something. They must be in denial of their shadow, or whatever way they were trying to frame it. And she wanted some reassurance that it was okay to be happy, which I thought was that's a great problem to have when you really see it. So I basically just reassured her, look, if you're, able to sleep, you're eating in a balanced way, you're able to do the things you need to do to go to work if you're working, to take care of your normal day-to-day business, and everything, is stable on those forever, and then fantastic, enjoy the happiness. Don't let anybody else tell you you shouldn't be so happy.
Sure.
If you need to deal with something, some part of your mind will let you know. So that was an interesting relational issue of sorts where there was a mismatch in their mood state.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
but,
Yeah.
yeah,
I can definitely, relate to sort of both ends of the spectrum there, and
yeah,
people feeling kind of both kinds of way, and like, is this
yeah.
okay?
No,
Like,
it's not fun when and everyone else is on. It seems to be really happy, and you're just feeling really raw
yeah.
and yeah. So that's the
Yeah.
other end of it. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you for that. I do want to get to just a couple questions. We've got a few minutes left here. So thank you guys for posting them. Can you recommend books on how to have out of body experiences or other materials? So maybe connecting more to
Oh, right.
people.
So I'm gonna the main author I recommend, and by is not necessarily by any means the only one, is just the one I remember that I was introduced to, is William Buhlman. So Buhlman, William Buhlman, and he has various books, and I believe has been involved in the field of out of body experiencing for a very long time. And essentially, I think he's interviewed many people about their experiences and started to kind of correlate the form of that. And then there are various strategies that people can put in place around their sleeping routines that can help to invoke it. Apparently, one of the main things that helps to invoke it is just intending that it happen. Um, Happens quite naturally for a lot of children. And then they start talking about things like imaginary friends and things like that that can be actually describing these kind of experiences. But yeah, I think there's an increasing interest in documentation of it. So there's probably various other sources around as well. That's
Okay.
just the one I know of.
Awesome. Thank you. Um, so I'll just answer this question. Do you use any other plant medicines in ceremony? So no, we work just with ayahuasca. We do work with mapacho, which is part of the paradigm of the Shapibo tradition. Mapacho is sacred jungle tobacco. Um, you have one. Oh.
Exhibit A. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Nicotina rustica, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a natural wild grown form of tobacco. So they use that to help connect and ground. And we do share mapachos during ceremony with guests as well if they would like that. But no other psychoactive medicines. The Shapibo tradition is very bare bones in terms of you have the medicine, you have your mapacho, and then the healers work with a flower water, agua florida, which is helpful for helping to ground people. So we really like to try and be guided within one tradition and one medicine so people can really go deeply within that experience and have a deeper relationship with that medicine. And so, so that's that. Um, this is an interesting question. Has ayahuasca changed your relationship with and the way you use language?
Yeah, I'm laughing because I've had moments where I'm barely convinced that words were being put into my mouth that I had not planned before I said them.
Mm,
That so yes, I think it does. I think it
mhm,
does. Actually, my friend and neighbor, who's a little bit more advanced on this path than me, says he's had experiences where ayahuasca and the other plants that he's been working with concurrently, which is the Shapibo tradition of it, have actually been teaching him how to speak to people in a good way that's basically makes them feel good and supported,
mm,
which I can absolutely believe will happen. Um, I've certainly found, so for example, I've been working as a psychologist and psychotherapist long before I started working with ayahuasca, and doing these healing meditation practices has always been an essential part of the way that I'm working with people. And ayahuasca actually gave me additional metaphors to describe mindfulness and mindful practices that I'd never
mm,
heard of elsewhere. So it does seem to, yeah, see changes in metaphors, concepts, ways of talking, for sure. And
Yeah.
it also, I think the other reason I was laughing is what ayahuasca has definitely done is shown me how ridiculous some of my thoughts and beliefs are, and has left me in absolute hysterics in that process of recognition. So I think there's got to be a change in the way that we talk that comes from that as well.
Very
Yeah.
well said. Cool. Just a couple more here. So, have you had the experience of, after using the medicine, having a conscious conversation or communication with ayahuasca as an entity during normal or everyday life? I'll answer it. I definitely
Yeah,
have.
go for it.
I do feel like there's a relationship that I personally have built with the medicine, and it's helped me connect to myself on a deeper level. But I also view it as a master plant teacher, which is in line with also how the Shapibo view it, and I definitely feel as though it's sort of been working through me in various ways, and definitely have let my thoughts go to, okay, like, trying to engage with it as this new relationship has formed and solidified over the years. So for me, I would say yes.
Yeah. I was thinking about it for myself. It's an interesting question because my ex-partner, who definitely has fairly engaged and intimate conversations with, in that sort of sense. For myself, it's always been a bit more kind of esoteric, and sometimes through this process of comparison, I got frustrated about that. I was like, why don't I get to have these conversations like this? And what I tend to get is these little sneaky, subtle, amusing hints. It's a little bit difficult to put it into words. There's definitely, you know, like the Mona Lisa smile, how there's this kind of ambiguousness to the Mona Lisa smile that is often discussed. And I get those kind of things where it's basically like she doesn't want to answer, but she's just kind of like winking at me, going
Yeah.
like, figure it out for yourself kind of thing. But there's a little hint of magic to the way and that seems to be the kind of relationship I have. I mean, I've had conversations with other plants in the theatre process, which is, an aspect of the Shapibo way of working with these plants. And it's like, and I have a certain degree of skepticism in the way I was brought up. So I was saying, I was having a conversation with something in my mind, and I said, but how do I know I'm not just talking to myself here? And so I was like, okay, well, tell me something I don't know. And it said, you don't know what time it is. And I just cracked up
That's
laughing
awesome.
because I was like, I have no idea what time it is. That
You're
is true.
right. That's
So it's
great.
not the answer I was expecting either. Uh,
I love
like,
that.
yeah,
There's like a sense of
there's a
humor
kind
to
of
all of this, I
there's
think.
always a sense of humor and a
Yeah.
cheekiness and
Yeah.
a sense of a refusal to be boxed in any way to, you know, preconceived expectation.
There you go. That's quite the metaphor, isn't it?
Mm.
Cool. So, last question: have you treated any women that suffer from PMDD, premenstrual dysmorphic disorder, or people that have suffered from narcissistic abuse? Um, Personally, for me, that doesn't come to mind immediately because I'm not a facilitator, and so I haven't been directly interacted. I don't know if that relates to you. I just also want to say to this person who asked the question, happy to follow up more directly if you want to send an email to us, and we can kind of discuss, situations that might be more relevant. But I just did want to ask the question, just see if there was anything you had to add about that.
Yeah. So for the premenstrual dysmorphic disorder, is that what it
Mm-hmm.
was? I'm not very specifically familiar with that. Um, so, but it is, from what I can intuit from the label, um, it is something that it would be potentially workable because dysmorphia of various kinds, is workable potentially. And the general approach, and certainly of the maestros, is never say never, right? Obviously, for safety reasons, there are certain things that we exclude, so like the psychotic disorders, and some people with more unstable personality disorder type territory, or traumas where they're not very, very well supported and prepared. Some of these things, for safety reasons, we will occasionally exclude, not because they couldn't in theory be helped under certain circumstances, but because within the format and container we have, we cannot adequately support that. So we will sometimes exclude those things. But the general attitude that the maestros bring is they will pretty much have a go at anything, because you never know exactly what's going to come. So, definitely for people who've been in answer to the second part of the question, for people who've been in, abusive relationships of various kinds, including with narcissistic people, yes, that's something that I think we will see on a relatively regular basis, actually, is people who have experienced difficult relationships of various kinds, including with abusive partners, getting benefit. So yeah, by all means, give us, if they want to get in touch with us personally, we're really happy to talk to them more and see if it's going to be suitable.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Sean. This has been very enlightening. I've really, really enjoyed
Thank you, Mel.
our
Yeah, me too.
conversation.
Great
So
to talk to you.
yeah, and thank you to everybody who tuned in. We'll be posting this video on our YouTube channel.
Thanks for your patience with our technical issues.
Yes, I feel like an old person, but now I know.
You learned a lot about Zoom and YouTube today
I
too,
did.
didn't you?
I learned a lot. Cheers, and thank you guys all for your comments. So yeah, we will see you on the next one. Thanks again,
Thank
Sean.
you. Thanks, Mel.